Hey, it's Stephanie with Unwritten. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I have such an awesome guest that I'm super excited to share with you. Her name is Shameria Ann, and she's a business coach and an entrepreneur. And she really just loves helping women find their path, continue on their path, and live more authentic lives. So, Shameria, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And let's kind of get started. Let's talk about your business a little bit and kind of how it all came about.
So I have a business called A Davis Consulting. It should probably have a different name since I do more than consulting, but I like it that way. I feel like most of the things that I do is really consulting people about their lives and where they're at right now, where they're trying to go. So I have an alphabet soup, as many of us do. But my joyful certifications are really in change management, in life coaching and health coaching, and kind of getting people to a place where they can really live and walk in their purpose, whatever it might be. Some people are um, not adept at really, taking the next step and kind of walking themselves in a direction. They know where they want to go, but they need a little guidance. And so that's the gist of how my business was launched. And I had a lot of friends that would watch my life kind of walking in purpose all the time. And people would say, I really wish I had your tenacity. Or I have a lot of people that will tell me in one way or another, there are so many things that you can do. Like, what can't you do? But I want people to feel that way about themselves, not just that way about me. And so I try to help people get there.
How did you get into this? Did you have a corporate career before, or has this always kind of been your path?
So I am a little bit of a weird kind of career person. I would say I've served 20 years in the military. And in that career, I went from enlisted. Many of you are military would understand the difference. I went from enlisted over to the officers' ranks. I came from a no college family. So I was a first generation graduate. So once I did get my degree, I made myself take the path of becoming an officer in the military from the enlisted world. In doing so, your career changes, but you get exposed to a lot of things you wouldn't necessarily otherwise get exposed to. And that includes working with generals in the military. So I learned a lot of things during that career path. And so once I transitioned fully into the civilian world, into a career, I was in corporate America immediately. And I really, really loved it. I just didn't like the structure where you could do so much for a person, but everything comes at a price tag or everything comes with a label. And I wanted to kind of move away from that.
What is the difference between being enlisted and being an officer?
So when you first join the military, you come in as like a private, or sometimes you come in with no rank at all, which is a very bottom. And so we have E levels in the military, W levels, which is a warrant officer, and then officer levels, which leads you to a general's rank. In the E levels, you have E1 through 9. And so I progressed up to 6. And in that rank structure, you're the worker bees. So you get everything done, and there are people above you who tell you how it needs to happen, and there are people above them that tell them how it needs to happen. And the people of them, is the president's office and the structure. So the higher you progress in rank from E through W up to O. So I skipped W's because W's are officers as well, but they're enlisted that become officers that got a degree, but they don't want to ever be a general. So if you have any aspirations to be a general, you want to be at the top of the chain, then you jump above that one to regular officers. I say regular to
Right.
officers ranks. And so there are company grade officers, field grade officers, and general officers. And so you progress up through those ranks to get there. So that's kind of the difference. If you're at
Wow.
the top of the rank structure, you're creating everything, and you're the one that's writing the orders that people will effectively um, pursue and deliver.
Wow. So you must have been driven to, I mean, because not everybody wants that,
Oh
correct?
yes. I watched well, first of all, females are like, I think right now we're sitting around 10 or 15% of the military total. And then so of officer ranks, it's a very, very insignificant number. Like, it's really small. It's like below 10. Um So I was very driven because I would watch things that were happening around me. And in my mind, you need some females to help you make some decisions about females because there weren't a lot of female officers. There still aren't. But that was one of my biggest issues is not being able to protect other females that I were seeing being mistreated, to include myself. And I recently wrote a book where I talk about kind of some military sexual assaults that I went through in my younger years in the military. It didn't get me to get out of the military, it really pushed me to be able to protect more people. It was all unconscious. You'd have to read the book to really understand the structure, but very, very driven.
Yeah. Let's talk about the book a little bit because I think that's an important part of your journey. When it, when you sat down to start writing your book, did you have an intention to actually publish it, or were you just doing it as your own, almost like therapy journal?
So funny story. I originally started writing a book of poetry. I've been writing since I was a kid. It was sort of a therapeutic release for me as a kid. I didn't really have outlets. I'm a millennial, but I was raised by boomers. And when you're raised by boomers, nothing against my boomers, I love them to death. It's a different way of parenting.
Mhm.
And you don't really have a voice as a kid. It's, kids do what they're told. And if you really need to I would call it banter or try to figure out rules and structure, there isn't really room for that. And then going into the military was no different. So I've been writing my entire life because I've always needed sort of an outlet to kind of banter with myself. So I originally started writing a nonfiction poetry book, and I did end up publishing that as well later this year, or earlier this year, a couple months ago. And that one I kind of put on pause for a while because life was just busy. And an opportunity came about to really write about my military experience, but largely the trauma that I've been holding. And that really came because I had gotten in therapy right after I retired. And I didn't remember the original assault. I had like brain washed it for 15 years. I just kind of buried it somewhere in the unconscious, and but it was affecting other areas of my life to include parenting and relationships. So once it did come back to the forefront, crazy how it happened, but I was in therapy and my therapist was asking me a bunch of questions and we're kind of going through PTSD screenings and stuff like that. And so I guess it was just the way that I respond to things. She was just like, something else is, at play. And she was like, I'm gonna go and ask you some questions. And she was like, just, get some answers. And so in that, it was it surreal, like when you're watching movies and like they get a memory flood. And it was sort of like that. And I remembered it. And um it took me a couple years to kind of work through. I'm still working through some of the details, but took me a couple years to kind of work through it. And through that, I decided I needed to write about it and share my story because it was affecting so many areas of my life that I didn't realize it was affecting. I am this, very driven, very ambitious woman, but it was coming from a place that wasn't just me being ambitious, it was hypervigilance to a large degree that was pushing me forward in a lot of things. And not to say that it weren't things that I didn't want to do, but I was sort of rebellious about it in a good way, but also not healthy. Even when you're pushed to success, it's not always a good reason it's pushing it. So really, a roundabout way to say it was crazy. And so I'll call everything crazy because some things happen and I don't see it coming.
Yeah. How common is sexual assault in the military?
It is decreasing
Oh,
in the latest probably 10 years or so. Um, but it used to be extremely common, especially for females, and it still is today. I've met a number of women that are still serving recently through my story that have told me about it. Some of them have gotten out and some of them are still serving, but it's very common. And a lot of people, when they think about sexual assault, they think about only rape, but rape is not the only way that you can be sexual assaulted. And it's most certainly not the only way that'll leave stigma behind. Largely sexual assault, being touched in any way or being forced to do anything in any way, can leave a stain behind that. doesn't sound to the normal person who hasn't experienced it to be a big deal, but for the person who has, it's a huge deal.
Yeah. Um, were you afraid? And I'm sorry, we're getting off topic, but I'm just
That's okay.
curious. Were you afraid when you published the book that you were going to get in trouble or people weren't going to believe you or
No. Um, when I wrote my story, I don't even remember his name, to be honest. So I don't really name call or anything to that degree about our stories. We can. I mean, I could, say whatever I needed to say because it's my story and I would own that. But no fear of any kind to tell the story other than fear of the people who never knew, to include my entire family. I never told anyone. It wasn't until I wrote the book that I actually told my mother
wow.
because I knew she'd read it.
Yeah. What was her reaction?
Um, she was very upset by it. I When I did my book launch event and she attended, she kind of walked out of the room when I got to that
Wow.
part. And throughout my life, she's tried to be very protective, but I grew up also around domestic violence. And she did too, sort of a um, family pattern, if you will. I was able to break that and not push myself into domestic violence relationships. But I did have a stalker when I was a teenager who was very verbally aggressive and emotionally aggressive. She actually caught it. It was my first boyfriend when I was 14, and he would continue to harass me and stalk me through college and college graduation, even into my first marriage.
Jesus.
So she's been very, very protective. If she had not protected me from that situation, I could very well have, been married to him and cycle would have continued. But she didn't take it well.
Yeah, so you're like the first person to break a lot of um um
I
history.
call them generational curses, but historical issues in a family, negative things. Yeah, for sure.
So after you got out of corporate, you started your own business.
Hmm.
Tell us all about your business.
Yeah. So I launched it before I kind of bridged the walk between corporate life and my business. So A Davis Consulting has three things really under its wheelhouse. One is coaching for the individual, and that includes life and health coaching. The second is coaching for business owners. So that includes just kind of mindset over other things, because sometimes being a business owner, your mindset has to be where it needs to be for you to really progress, because you can go and shoot for the moon, but if you don't have any confidence while you're doing it, you're not going to succeed. So I call it brand confidence management. But I do that in a little bit of coaching with their business. So in that, we build their logos based off of their personal preferences. So I have an artist on staff that will draw logos for business owners that are based on their personal preferences, and we get it digitized, and so that'll go into the business. And we also create websites for them, sort of starter websites. It'll have a little bit of e-commerce abilities on there, but we kind of get them going. And then the third one is book publishing.
Let's talk about publishing. I know a
Okay.
lot of people that want to write books or they have written books and all of a sudden they're oh it's like, "Oh, I have an Amazon bestseller." It's like, how did you just do that? How did you just like
Yeah.
write a book and now it's an Amazon bestseller?
Yeah. I'm an Amazon bestseller, which is exciting, super
Yes, tell
exciting.
me about this. Like, how do you write a book and become an Amazon bestseller? Like,
um, the bestseller is the book where we talk about our traumas. It's myself and a few other women. When we talk about our traumas, I'm the only military one, so it's not like a military trauma book. Um, but we're from all over the world. Really, making a bestseller is about knowing the audience that you wish to serve and then putting something out there that's worth their time and energy, things they can relate to, things they'll love. Um, And in writing my chapter in that particular book, I didn't want to just talk about the trauma, but I also wanted to talk about the mindset where I was able to overcome the trauma that's kind of inwoven into that story. When you're able to not just, a lot of people want to write a book and they just want people to know about their lives. But your book has to serve your audience too. It can't just be an outlet of, what you want to tell your audience about. It's got to be a little bit more than that. So for it to really make waves, it's got to be able to give people something that they either want to share with other people or that is going to make them better in general. And in turn, they're going to share with other people, both, directly and indirectly. And so I think that's really the gist of writing a bestseller is you got to have two points of view. What do I want to share and how is it going to help?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole with trauma, that's the whole idea. It's you have to
Hmm.
take that trauma and how does it who would you be without it? And
Right. And how are you able to overcome? And I think some people, they think about my story or they listen to my story and they say, well, first of all, I don't know how you're so strong, or
mhm,
some people will tell me, I have no idea um, how you were able to go through so many things consecutively. Like, because if you look at the story from the outside, it looks like a pattern. And you discover that when you're writing, but it doesn't feel like a pattern when you're living life. It's just life. And every single thing that hits you when it hits you. And then you got to figure out how to respond. And later on, you may notice that there was a pattern. But if in the middle of it, you start talking to yourself about a pattern, you may never come out of it because you may psych yourself out. You know what I mean?
mhm. Okay, so you have somebody that wants to work with you, but they're stuck in that pattern, and because you've been through it and because you're on the other side of it, is that part of your business is helping them see that pattern? And
If
how do
I'm
you go about
working,
doing that?
so if I'm working with just to make sure I understand, if I'm working with a person who's wanting to write and they already recognize the pattern,
Yeah,
or
or they
I
wanna
see it
start
in
a
their writing.
yeah, they wanna start a business, but they've tried 5 times and it doesn't work. So, how do you go about helping people that are kinda stuck in their own stuff?
Really, it's funny. I have a client like that right now. I have a life coaching client that's like that right now. She's sort of a serial hop into one thing after another kind of person. But our goal in her coaching is not even business focused. It's life coaching for her because there's a certain level of, if you don't know your purpose and what you want to be doing or what you feel called to do, you'll do anything because you're just chasing success and you're not necessarily chasing your purpose. And I think the best way to be successful is in your purpose. Everybody was designed with a purpose in mind. My personal belief. Everybody was designed with a purpose in mind. And you're going to be best at what it was that you were designed to do. You're 9 times out of 10 know exactly what that is. But either you think it's not lucrative or, you're not confident in doing it, or other people have spoken into you negatively and told you, that's not worthwhile. A primary example is the artist that I work with should have really gone to sort of an art institute as a young person, but was talked out of it by a parent who didn't believe in art, felt like it wasn't a lucrative sort of field, but it actually really is. But that parent has a limited understanding of art and what it really means. So that was spoken into them as a kid. Now, today, a very successful artist and very, very creative and can really do some amazing things, but took years of having to just kind of develop that in a quiet place without seeking an artist status to really for that to grow for them. But they kept at it. And if you have somebody that does speak into you, and let's say you see their drawing one day, you're like, oh my God, like that's amazing. Enough people were like, oh my God, like to see the work or to enter their home and then see the work and be like, what, why aren't you an artist? Once enough people have then spoken into you, it undoes whatever was planted before, which was negative about that thing that you're purposeful. But you've been doing every other career but art. So a lot of times, if I receive a person that's been a serial, business owner, I'm already trying to figure out, okay, are these things that you've been trying to put your energy into things that you wanted to put your energy into, or you just hopped into, or did someone else talk you into, or did someone else plant a seed and then you tried to grow it, but it wasn't your seed, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and our brains are so tricky that
Hmm.
it's really hard unless somebody is gonna be really honest with you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. You can't really be successful until you know who you are and know what you're good at. And a lot of people, they don't believe they're good at anything.
Yeah.
So they're just trying to survive and they're just trying to do whatever. And it's like everybody's good at something. And
Yeah.
so you've got to back up a little bit if you're trying to be a business owner and figure out first what is it that I'm good at? What am I purposeful at? What am I called to? It could be as simple as, kid you not, it can be as simple as, I really love to go and feed the homeless. So maybe you should be an entrepreneur that focuses your business interests on the homeless because you're obviously passionate about that. And that could be your purpose. It could be helping those who are unhelped, it could be helping the underserved. You may have a purpose wrapped all the way up in that. You could be a $1 million CEO waiting to happen in that field, but you just think it's volunteer work, but it's not. It's what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that wi with my business. Well, first off, I was one of those kids too that I wanted to be an artist, and my parents were like, "You can't be an artist." So, when I became a photographer and was able to have a full-time photography business, I was like, "Oh, I can do this."
Yes.
But purpose is different. People told me I was a good photographer, so I learned how to be a good photographer. A-
Hmm.
And that's great, but my purpose is this sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
connecting people and listening to stories uh, and this just started about 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I found my purpose. So
Yeah.
it's do you have a system that you try to use how have you figured out a way to help people find their purpose?
I I wouldn't call it a system. It's a genuine intuition. It's kind of like
Yeah.
when you're a photographer and you're behind a lens and you see the world in a different way. And it's not necessarily teachable. Like the best photographers in the world, they're self-taught. It's
Yeah.
because they love it. It's because they see a different image. So I don't necessarily have a system for how I coach people. I do have a structure in place, of course. I don't really have a system. I have to feel you out and figure out if I'm able to help you before I don't just take on clients.
Yeah.
And so I have to figure out if I can help you first. I have to see what it is that we're trying to get to. And I have to, and I pray about it. I'll be open about that. I pray about it when I reach someone and say, can I work with this person or can I not? And it's not that I can work with anyone. It's just, am I going to be effective? Because I don't want to take anyone's money just to take your money. Can I be effective in working with you?
So do you do consultations or how do
I do.
you yeah.
My consultations are 100% free of charge. I usually do 30 minutes to an hour with people to determine, and I'll have, the first question I'll ask them is, so what do you see as our end result? Like what is your, on the last day you see me, what we've accomplished? I want that up front. What is it that you have an expectation of? So that I kind of know what direction we're walking in. Sometimes what they give me is not what they really need. But
Right, that's what we were saying,
they'll give it
you
to
get so
me. Yeah.
stuck, yeah.
They'll give it to me and I'll listen. And then I'll walk backwards. Okay. Tell me why you're not there now, and tell me, the backstory. Oftentimes I want them to go all the way back to childhood because some things were planted there.
Oh, yeah. I think that the biggest the biggest part of anybody at this age is getting past all that childhood stuff because, I'm in my 40s.
Yep.
A lot of women are in their 40s, I think, when they realize or their 30s, even if you're lucky. Oh, wow, this isn't authentic to me anymore. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, but you have to go back and undo all those pieces.
Sometimes people can't see them. They can't see um the pieces that they're dragging, the baggage, so to speak. Some people can't see it. I met someone recently that's been through a few divorces. And largely they were the one who wanted the divorce, and oftentimes found issues in each person. And while those issues with each person were in fact issues with each person, there were issues in them that were driving that negative energy out of each person, but it manifested differently. So it's really easy to think that you're not the one that's part of the problem if the problem with people has been different with every person, right? So people say, well, what's the weakest link? You're like, it's not me because I had this issue with this one, that issue with that one. It's like, okay, but what about you is driving that issue in other people? And that's where the epiphany happens. You're like, oh. And so if you sit and talk to people about how do you manage conflict? What do you do when you're angry? You'll get the best answers until you're angry. And then if I don't have an opportunity as a life coach um, to know those trigger points for you, I may never be able to help you with them. So you've got to kind of be honest and bring other perspectives in. Tell me what other people say about you, or tell me what other people have said, or you'll get someone and they'll say, so many people think that I'm rude, but I'm not. Like, and they're focused on their personality type and why they're not rude. And it's like, if you have a handful of people telling you that you're rude, there's probably some truth to your rudeness, but it may be not be because you intend to be rude, but it just may be an outer surface thing that you don't notice about yourself, facial expression, um, a way of being, closing people off. It could be so much deeper and people don't recognize it.
Yeah, I think that what your job is, no, I'll call it a purpose. What your purpose is to help people see the truth.
Hmm.
And once they see the truth, then they can find their purpose.
Hmm. You can do what you will after that, but you gotta know you before anybody else can know you.
Yeah. And how did you find your truth?
Um, I, for whatever reason, have always been sort of intuitive and bare bones approach to most things in life, because I grew up around a lot of people who, for all intents and purposes, weren't very humble. And it was annoying as a child to be around a bunch of people, you'd see them one way in the home and then one way outside of the home. And it's not to call my parents out. My mom is one way at home sometimes, and another way out in public. The same thing with my siblings. And so I really made a decision in high school to go into psychology. And I was one of those people that was going to graduate early. And they're like, well, if you pick some electives, to kind of figure out what you want to do in college, go ahead and finish your senior year. So I picked psychology amongst a few other things that I was interested in. And psychology really stuck out to me. And I'm like, I really want to know why people behave the way they behave, or think the way that they think. And really, it was another way to analyze my family. So when I went into my undergraduate degree, I went into psychology, and I learned a whole host of things about me, myself and others. And then I went into a master's in psychology to do the same. And I walked into the field of emotional intelligence. And that field really makes you look at every single angle of an issue. And you can never focus on yourself if you have emotional intelligence. Never. That's the whole point of it, is to be able to see everybody's point of view and how you're affecting other people and how they're affecting you, and then how to deal with how you're affecting other people and how they're affecting you. It can be exhausting because emotional intelligence teaches you not to get your way. And that's really what got me here, is getting to a place where I could take my understanding of emotional intelligence with myself and others and say, okay, I know where my shortcomings are too. So immediately, if someone is offended by me, I probably already know why. And I can have a conversation with them about that, which sometimes people are like, oh, you know, no, no, if I wanted to have a conversation with you about that, because it's almost like seeing into their point of view. It's almost invasive. Um, but I prefer it that way because I don't really like misunderstandings. They aren't necessary.
Yeah, but nobody does that. Like, I
Oh,
don't.
I know.
I
I
avoid
know it.
conflict at like every.
Nobody does it. And
Yeah, so that's how you found your truth, is
mhm.
just chipping away at it all.
Myself and others, yeah, looking at them and
Yeah.
you're like, Do you realize you're doing this? I think I probably want to pinch myself as much as I say that to people. Oftentimes, if people have no emotional intelligence at all, they'll say, they'll be offended, excuse me, or like they immediately jump to defense and tell you why they're doing what they're doing. And you're like, it's not really about why you're doing what you're doing, but it's how you're affecting other people when you do it. And so they feel like the why they're doing something is more important than how. And it's not. They're both important.
This is a subject I don't know a lot about, so I'm just I love it. I'm absorbing it all.
Yeah. Emotional intelligence is fun if the people around you are also using a little bit of it. Life is so much easier that way, but there's a lot of things that get lost in intentions. So I mean, there's like right now there's a social media craze about intention versus impact. I'm sure you've heard that a million times.
Hmm.
Intent versus impact. But what gets lost sometimes with people who aren't professionals in the field is that intent versus impact are equal. My intent is just as important as the impact that it had on you. And I have to understand the impact it had on you. And you also have to understand my intent. You can't have one without the other. So a person who's offended is usually offended because something that you said impacted them. And they'll say, well, I'm offended by that. Normal person without emotional intelligence in tow will say, it wasn't my intention to offend you because this is what I intended when I said what I said. What they're missing is I can say, before I tell you my intention, I can say, I understand that you were impacted. And then in their apology is not necessary, but acknowledgement that you have impacted them is necessary. And those are not the same. But some people demand an apology for your intent. But what they really should be demanding is an acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I've hurt your feelings in some sort of way. And so let me tell you what I meant, but then let me say it a different way. And let's scratch it and start over. That's what should happen.
Yeah,
People won't do that.
right.
People don't do that because
Yeah,
they're like,
that's
no, because you said, and then you'll
yeah.
have to go into a conversation about how you both understand words. Now, literacy is a whole nother subject.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the United States right now, the average literacy age is eighth grade for adults. That's, I think about eighth graders raising children, and
Yeah.
that's no bueno. And
Yeah.
largely the reason for that is not to, a lot of people will be offended by that. An eighth grader 20 years ago knows far less than an eighth grader knows today. And an eighth grader 20 years before that knows far less than an eighth grader knows today because of modern times and access to information and education and algebra, for crying out loud. Your eighth graders now are doing algebra. Your eighth graders before were doing pre-algebra, and eighth graders before that never touched algebra. So your eighth grade understanding it's a big window of stuff. So one word that I use may not mean the same thing to you. The English dictionary is not our greatest friend because there's multiple definitions for words. So I could use one word and it can mean five things. It'll mean one thing to you, it'll mean one thing to me, and one thing to three other people. We could all be in the same conversation and now we're in an argument because we all have a different understanding of that word. And there was no need for an argument because the word has five definitions, but I'm so intent on mine and you're so intent on yours that we're like, psh, it's a six, it's a nine, it's a six, it's a nine. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. It's funny you brought
So
that up because I accidentally bought a pair of pants that were a 6 and I needed a 9.
see,
Yeah. And it's like,
the
"Oh, I didn't
world is
see it that way."
interesting. The world is very, very interesting. So when I work with people, I'm having these conversations with them.
Yeah.
Largely, I'm unpeeling that, impact that others have had on them because it's self-centered. Well, they did this and they meant to hurt me. Did they though? Well, my mother was this way with me, but was she that way because she hated you? Or was she that way because she's dealing with her own traumas? Because how was her mother? Has she ever talked to you about her mother? Has your father ever talked to you about his father? You know,
Yeah,
how did their father act with them? And how did
you
their
have a
father's
way.
father act with them? I mean, it can go
Yeah,
way, 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 way back.
yeah,
But we're not thinking about any of that when we're interacting with the person in front of us. The person in front of us has impacted us. And now I want you to apologize because you've hurt my feelings. But I've hurt your feelings, but why did I hurt your feelings? Is it because of something you got going on with you, or is it because I actually intended to hurt your feelings? And if you understand me, and if you respect me, and if we have a very long-standing relationship, husband and wife, I'm not here to hurt you. So why do you assume I hurt you on purpose? And why would you marry me if you thought I would hurt you on purpose?
yeah.
So we got to dig deeper.
Yeah, so that's your system,
Pretty
is
much.
cutting away all the bullshit that we tell
Hmm.
ourselves,
Pretty much.
and then once you cut that away, you find your truth.
Yes. And some people are in tears every
Yeah.
single time I sit with them because they recognize that they have been holding themselves back.
Mm.
And usually it's because of trauma. Trauma is not this, I got into a car crash and it was a head on collision. That's trauma's, you could have tripped and hit your head on a rock. Trauma is, subjective. Everything is not, darkness in the woods being attacked by a bear. It's not all crazy.
So, somebody out there is listening to this podcast and they are like, "Okay, to I'm ready to work." How do they go about finding you? And tell us just a little bit more about connecting with you.
Okay. Everything for me flows through my website,
Okay. And what is that?
which is www.shameriaann.com. So if you're trying to spell that out, it's SHAMERIAANN.com. Um, and on there, you're able to book services. You can buy all my books on the website as well. So if you're like, I'm in the mood to read, um, the poetry book that I have has a accompanying workbook. So
Mhm.
it's two books. The first book is the poems themselves. They're all nonfiction. They're all about my life and the way my lives have affected other people. And the workbook helps people work through those poems in case those poems have triggered you, which in a lot of cases they will. I've had so many people already tell me, like, I feel like you wrote this book for me. I'm like, our lives intertwine in more ways than one.
Yeah.
So they can buy them all there, but you can also book any of the consultations with me on there. And it won't charge you to book a free consultation. I'll meet with you and then determine if it's the best fit. If you're local to Texas, I like to meet my clients in person, so I will travel. But if you're not local to Texas, online is perfectly fine with me.
Yeah. I can't imagine anybody wouldn't want to. And I love that you have different ways of connecting. So you have the book and then also working with you,
Hmm.
because some people are just uncomfortable.
Right. They may need to read my story to get more comfortable. They may
Yeah.
need to read all of them to get more comfortable and say, you know what, I think I might be able to trust her.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
And understand where you're coming from. So yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to share with my listeners today?
No, I just really appreciate the time and the opportunity to have a chit chat. I'll tell you, if you love art, which I heard you say, even though
Yes.
you're doing photography, you should pursue them both.
Oh, yeah.
If you have
I
a
mean,
photography studio and you have artwork that you've done, I would suggest you hang it.
yeah, I don't. I hang my pictures, but
Hmm.
yeah, I love that.